Hi, and welcome back to week 4 of World History. Today we're going to dive in with the Catholic Church, a powerhouse in medieval Europe. Yay, more videos that we would have watched in class. Okay, so the Christian Church, they at the time created moral standards, they owned extensive lands in Europe, and they also struggled with secular rulers, meaning rulers who did not follow the faith. They also supported monasticism, which is these monasteries where people could live in cloisters and like Benedictines, Franciscans. So the Pope, he had authority that continued to grow during the medieval period. So we see the establishment of canon law, which is church law. We see these specific writings being put out against certain types of heresies or teachings against the church. The Pope is going to excommunicate anyone who goes against the church, as well as we see investiture, which we've already talked about briefly. But basically, it's this conflict between monarchs and papacy for who has the most power. So it's the process of appointing church officials where Pope Gregory the Seventh is going to say, hey, I'm the only one who can appoint church officials. Henry the Fourth, which is the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, so he's the king, he's going to say, yeah, no, I have some friends that I want to be in charge, so I'm going to appoint church officials. The Pope will excommunicate Henry the Fourth. He is a very devout Catholic, so he will apologize and then be reinstated with the church, giving the Pope more power. So, monasticism, going into a little bit more specifics. Basically, they're monasteries. So there are so many different types of monasteries today that were founded by St. Benedict or St. Francis, just to name a few. Benedict of Nursia, we talked about him, I think, last week, maybe the week before. Anyways, he was a man who felt like the world was full of corruptness, so he sold all of his possessions and basically lived like a hermit, and then he felt like God was calling him to something greater. So he's going to form a monastery with Benedictine rules that require strict responsibility to the community. They focus on education and promote Christian unity. They're also going to preserve Greco-Roman cultural achievements. Okay, this is an order that still exists today. St. Clare of Assisi is going to found monastic religious orders for women. She will follow St. Francis of Assisi, who developed an order for men. So, this is an opportunity for women to become nuns. It gave them an escape from social classes. So, being in a low social class, this was their way to escape that, similar to Buddhism. So, role of monasteries. Here's where you guys get to write down a T chart, right? So, the spiritual role of the monastery was to teach them holiness, to network, and essentially go out and be pilgrims or spreading the faith. The secular role was to educate those who are non Catholic Christians, to own, work large estates, and to provide shelter for travelers. So, they worked both in the spiritual realm and the worldly realm. So, Christianity will impact village life. The church will become the center of village life. Each manor will have a priest, and each peasant and or serf will be required, according to their faith, to tithe, which is pay 10% of their income to the church. They also need to follow the sacraments, such as baptism, confirmation, marriage. Funeral is not a sacrament. It's actually called the anointing of the sick, and it's a special blessing that people receive before surgeries or when they're dying. And then Holy Communion. They also left out confession. So, Mass will break the repetitive routine of work. Mass is the words used to describe the church service. So, if you hear someone say, oh, I'm going to Mass on Sunday, that means they're going to church. The church will also hold festivals and celebrations, specifically on feast days, saint feast days, Christmas, things like that. Now we get into the fun part, the Crusades. So, God is going to will the Crusades, and I'm going to explain that a little bit more. So basically, the Crusades are holy wars that lasted from 1095 to 1270. They're military campaigns by European Christians in the 11th to 14th century. The result will be increased trade, increase in cultural diffusion, an increase in knowledge, and strong barriers. This is going to cause division big time amongst Christians and Muslims. The bottom line, these wars were religious at their core. If we were going to be having comps on this, that would be a comp topic. So basically a little bit of a background. The West was on the rise while the East started to decline. Advancing Seljuk Turks were threatening Constantinople. We see them overthrow Constantinople at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. Pope Urban II is going to receive an appeal from the Byzantine Emperor asking for help. In 1095, Pope Urban II calls for the very first crusade, saying God wills it. He is going to use the rational thought that by the Muslims or the Seljuk Turks, who were of Muslim faith, they gain control of Constantinople, which is trade routes and pilgrimage routes to the Holy Land. That is not good for Christians. So he's going to say God wants us to fight, protect, and preserve the Holy Land. So he's going to promise indulgences. Indulgences are basically their forgiveness of all past sins. A really, really blanket basic idea would be kind of like a get out of jail free card. So if you were to, follow these indulgences, and let's say make a pilgrimage to the holy doors or something like that, then the belief was that God would grant you forgiveness of all your past sins without having to go to confession. His goal was to unite Europe using a common enemy. He wanted to reunite the Roman Catholic Church with the Eastern Orthodox Church. So that was his mission. The First Crusade is going to last 4 years, from 1095 to 1099. It will have an early success. So we see a collection of militias, so small bands of warriors, under various minor nobles. This will be a chance for lesser lords to get land and glory, because back then, the firstborn son would get everything. So then that means a second, third, fourth would have to become knights or make a name for themselves in order to have any sort of land when they got older, got married. Also, Jerusalem is going to be under Christian control and create 4 Christian states. This will not last. Saladin will lead raids that take back the land. So from here on out, the Crusades are going to basically be one failure after the other. We don't talk too much about the Second Crusade because it's not much to talk about. The Third Crusade is going to last from 1189 to 1192. We're going to see leading monarchs, so leading kings, leading their soldiers to the Holy Land to fight. Specifically, England will be represented by Richard the Lionheart, France will be represented by Philip II, and then Frederick I will represent the Holy Roman Empire. This Third Crusade will end with a truce where Muslims will allow Christians to go on pilgrimages to the Holy Land on the condition that they are not armed, meaning they can't defend themselves. They don't have any sort of weapons. This truce does not last. The Fourth Crusade is going to be financed by traders or merchants, not like traders Benedict Arnold, but merchants, right? Specifically the Venetians. The merchants' goal was to seek control of trade. This is where we see the sacking and looting of Constantinople in 1204. This basically is the fall of the East. There was also a children's crusade, fun fact, in 1212. Yes, that is correct. Children literally marching to the Holy Land. Many of them were either killed or enslaved. It did not go well. Notice here, they're literally riding their little toy horses here. Yeah, very noble effort, but not practical. So expanding the crusading movement is going to lead to expansion in the Iberian Peninsula, specifically more Spain. We're going to expand into the Baltic region as well as the Byzantine and Russian areas. This will also see an attack on the Jews, and we're going to revisit this issue when we get to the bubonic plague. So impact of the Crusades. We see the conquest of Spain, Sicily, and the Baltic region. The Pope strengthens their position. So Innocent III, who reigns from 1198 to 1216, is going to institute the Inquisition. This is a big, fancy court that was used to identify and punish heretics, or people who were going against the church. We see much more contact with the Mediterranean world, as well as cultural barriers. So there will be a lot of mistrust and intolerance of each other, specifically amongst the Jewish people, Christians, and Muslims. It's going to have really little impact in the Middle East, but a large impact on Europe. Lasting impact will result in merchants expanding their trade networks further east. The power of the church will continue to grow, and we'll see weakened feudal nobility and increased power of the kings. We're also going to see an introduction to the West, or reintroduction, right? Since these trade routes are now being reopened since the fall of Western Rome. On these trade routes, sugarcane, spices, and luxury goods, such as porcelain, glassware, and carpets, are going to make their way west. So John Green has some great videos about the Crusades. That's pretty much it for the Catholic Church in medieval Europe. So stay tuned. We're going to talk about problems in the later Middle Ages, which leads to, you guessed it, the plague. You guys in